Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the wisdom literature of the scriptures as part of our continuing series of the poetic books of the Old Testament. Now, when we speak of wisdom literature, we need to note that this was a genre that was known throughout the ancient world. For example, we go to the instructions of Kagemni. This is dated to the 5th dynasty of Egypt, well before Abraham. Let your name go forth, we read, while you are silent with your mouth when you are summoned. Be not great of heart because of your strength among those your age, lest you be opposed. One knows not what may happen and what God does when he punishes. That almost sounds like it's something coming from the Bible, but this isn't the Bible. This is long before Abraham. But notice it gives that kind of wisdom. Be slow to speak, he's saying, especially when you be slow to speak and don't be overproud, especially when you are among those who are older than you. Show respect to them because you're not old enough to have that kind of verbal opinion. Maxims of Good Discourse, 2400 BC, although it might be a little bit later than that. I'm rounding off these dates. Also an Egyptian writing. If the Son of Man accepts his Father's words, and notice Son of Man is just the way of describing any old person. If he accepts his Father's words, no plan of his will go wrong. Teach your son to be a hearer, one who will be valued by the heart of the nobles, one who guides his mouth by what he was told, one regarded as a listener. This son excels, his deeds stand out, while failure enters him who listens not. The knower wakes early to his lasting form, while the fool is hard pressed. And notice the idea here again is, although it's not addressed to the son, it's addressed to the person who's teaching the son, but the importance of being quiet and listening, and don't open your mouth. Don't be so quick to speak, because that way can lead to ruin. He goes on to say, the fool who does not listen can accomplish nothing at all. He sees knowledge as ignorance, useless, as harmfulness. He does all that is detestable and is blamed for it each day. He lives on that by which one dies. He feeds on, excuse the term, damned speech. His sword is known to the officials, to wit, a living death each day. What a reputation to have. Man, he just kills you, not in a good way. One passes over his doings because of his many daily troubles. So, maxims of good discourse, this is wisdom literature, and again, in this case, it's speaking to the value of listening, and it's good to listen. Now we move from Egypt to Mesopotamia. This is known as a Babylonian theodicy. Theodicy is the idea of how can God, or in this case the gods, be seen as righteous and good when bad things happen. This is dated to around the time of King David, 1000 BC, and we begin reading, those who seek not after a god can go the road of favor. Those who pray to a goddess have grown poor and destitute. Indeed, in my youth, I tried to find out the will of my God. With prayer and supplication, I besought my goddess. I bore a yoke of profitless servitude. Notice, I was serving, but didn't amount to much. He goes on to say, my God decreed for me poverty instead of wealth. A cripple rises above me. A fool is ahead of me. Rogues are in the ascendant. I'm demoted. I did everything that was right. And instead of good things coming my way, bad things came my way. Adept scholar, master of erudition, you blaspheme in the anguish of your thoughts. Divine purpose is as remote as innermost heaven. It is too difficult to understand. People cannot understand it. Just because you don't know the way the universe works doesn't mean it's not working. Just because you don't know what God is doing doesn't mean that he's not doing something. So notice these thoughts that remind us of some of the themes that we're going to see when we get to the book of Job. Now, I've shown some similarities between the Proverbs and ancient Near East wisdom literature, but there are some differences as well. For example, in the In the Bible, I have a very strict monotheism, only one God, versus the polytheism that I have both in Egypt and in Mesopotamia. Secondly, notice the importance of human life as opposed to land values. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, land was everything, and so there's a negation of the value of human life, and yet the Bible holds up man as made in the image of God. The Proverbs point out that man is originally created, not just the Proverbs, all the Bible points out that man is created in the image of God, but there's been a fall. It's a fallen world, and so bad things happen. Not that man was created that way, but because that's taken place. And so that's in the backdrop against the Proverbs and the other biblical wisdom literature. Our world life view then begins with God, who, and from that we get our view of life and the way we ought to live. So that God gave the law to Moses, and then from this point on, now we have the wisdom literature, which is explaining how we ought to live based upon our view of life, which is based upon the Torah. When we speak of the wisdom literature, notice that all these books that I've listed here, the Psalms and Job and Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, they're all poetry for the most part. There's a couple of chapters in Job and a couple sections in Ecclesiastes that, strictly speaking, are not poetry. But most of these books are poetic books. They're poetic literature. But of that poetry, 3 books in particular are normally classified as wisdom literature, and that's Job and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Now, what sets poetic literature apart, because these are all poetry, from wisdom literature in particular? In all of the poetry, the narrator is viewed as just a normal person. In the Psalms, he might be the king, he might just be a psalmist. It's just a regular person who is invoking the Lord. In wisdom literature, the narrator is viewed as the wise voice of experience. He's not necessarily physically older, but he's had some experience by him, which usually assumes, yes, he's actually older. In poetic literature, that touches the heart. Wisdom literature touches the mind, makes you stop and think about it. In poetry, there's a focus on human emotion. In wisdom literature, there's a focus on wisdom, where you hear the truth that's specified, and then you stop and you ponder it and you think about it. In poetry, that depicts our love for God and for others, and of course His love for us. In wisdom literature, it's how to live before God and how to live with others.